Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you, Ken?
I'm exceptionally well, thanks for asking, Rory. And Rory and I hope that you're well. You've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast at episode 272. And we've got three really good topics for you today, starting off with student services, where we dip our toe into the world of study and the journey that a student may go through. And we're here to try and support you on that journey. And today, we're going to be looking at the myth of the core conditions. Dun, dun, dun. Dun. I'm building up the the tension there. We then go into ethical, sustainable practice. This is a new slot started in our last episode, and this is where we recognize that these days, starting, building, and running an ethical, sustainable practice takes, I guess, ongoing development and looking to what's happening around us. And today we're going to be looking at accreditation. And the question we're asking is, should I become accredited? And I think this is also an interesting topic for students as well, as you kind of look ahead at what your career may look like. And then we end today's episode by going to Practice Matters. That's the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And we have a guest, an expert in the field. And Rory, you met up with Daniel Hand about role-playing games in psychotherapy. So that is an interesting topic and a definite must. Stick around for that. And of course, if you are qualified, listen to it and then pop down the time on your CPD tracker to kind of evidence the CPD you are doing, because you will do that, I guess, in service of your practice and your clients. But kicking us off, those student services and that myth of the core conditions. Now, why are we saying that? Does myth and core conditions go together, Rory? What's happening here?
Well, I think it's a very good question, Ken. And every year I get the odd email from students and indeed tutors who say to me, core conditions, 6 necessary and sufficient conditions. Why at certificate level do they teach the core conditions, and why at diploma level, where you're going to be working with clients, do they teach the 6 necessary and sufficient conditions? And I think we're in a position to demystify this. So in 1957, Carl Rogers in the Journal of Consulting Psychology produced what could be his magnum opus, his big idea. And the big idea was the 6 necessary and sufficient conditions for therapeutic change. And please, if you're going to put that in your assignments, use the whole of that, the 6 necessary and sufficient conditions for therapeutic change. And of those conditions, there was what we sometimes known as the facilitative conditions: empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. And they became known as the core conditions. So the mystery is, how did they become the core conditions? Well, I think I'm going to refer to a magazine article in Counselling, published in February 2000. Now, Counselling was the predecessor to Therapy Today, the magazine that is given to members of the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy. When you have a membership, you get a magazine every month, and it used to be called Counselling. And there was a wonderful article by Keith Tudor, a very famous elder in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, and he outlines where that came from. And it actually came from a man called Robert Karkoff. Robert Karkoff was one of Roger's students, and it was him who is identified as naming the three core conditions of empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard, and calling them the core conditions. So the mystery deepens. Why did he do that, Ken? Why did he name them the core conditions and strip three off? And the answer to that is quite straightforward. Person-centered therapy is born of social work. Rogers, in 1928, joined the Rochester Children's Home, helping with children, and he met someone called Jessie Taft, who was a social worker. So person-centered therapy began its life in social work. A lot of Rogers' early students were social workers, and Robert Karkoff, he went on then to write social work books and if you like, overlay those core conditions into social work. Because if you think about it, any helping profession, you're going to need empathy. You're going, try and find what the other person's frame of reference is, be very real and genuine, and also be non-judgmental. So they fit for so many things. So that is the history. Robert Karkoff, 1969, he coined it. Mm-hmm. So there you have it, Ken.
Well, now I see why you called it the myth of the core conditions, because I guess there is a knee-jerk reaction to suggest that Carl Rogers coined the phrase the core conditions, and of course you've just shown us he did not. That is a myth. And it kind of shines the light on that mystery and kind of shows us where it is from. And when you say Karkoff, I think of the Karkoff and Trokes rating scales, rating empathy, and you can see the kind of work that was done there. So if you're doing skills practice within your training course, it is likely that your empathy has been measured by those rating scales. And it's interesting you mentioning other helping professions. I think those, I'm going to call them core conditions now for the sake of this episode, or the facilitative conditions, which I think is more academically correct and a better phrase to use in assignments, definitely as you're going forward. We recognize that they are the conditions that belong to the counsellor. It is the counsellor that adopts the conditions. It is the counsellor who demonstrates the empathy. It is the counsellor who is congruent within the relationship. It is the counsellor who is prizing or non-judgmental of the client that sits before them. And if we look at the 6 conditions, we'll notice that the other 3 conditions relate to the client and how they are receiving those core conditions. So it makes sense that there would be a focus specifically in early studies. Level 2, you might only look at the core conditions, and they may be introduced later within that course or module, or even at the next level of study. They are very important. They are a grounding, and as you say, Rory, not just a grounding in counselling, but a grounding in a helping relationship. And what I found, a really good grounding for life as well. When we find ourselves in situations, they can come in really, really handy. And I know that from our listeners, not everybody starts the counselling journey to become a fully qualified counsellor in practice seeing clients. Many take on this journey to gain some skills for themselves that are transferable. And I think that these conditions, empathy, congruence, unconditional positive regard, are amazing things to learn about because they are so transferable. You can use them pretty much in any job, in any situation. If you find yourself in a difficult situation or looking for a raise at work or anything like that, using those conditions, listening, being kind, being there and understanding the other person's point of view, very, very beneficial. And I have to say, Rory, pretty rare in everyday run-of-the-mill society interactions, those core conditions. It's usually what's in it for me.
Usually is, yes. Yes, sadly. But when you meet somebody who uses those conditions, it usually is a bit of a joy. I'm very fortunate. I meet people who use those conditions. They probably don't know what they are. They probably just naturally are empathic. They're naturally genuine, and they're naturally non-judgmental. And it's wonderful because you immediately feel at ease. You immediately feel, heard and valued, and it makes a huge amount of difference. And just to go back to your point on why these three conditions are taught at certificate level, and I'm using the term certificate level deliberately because obviously our listeners in Scotland don't know what level 3 and level 4 is. Scottish qualifications are on a different level. They have a different number for their qualifications. But if you're doing a certificate, what you're getting is a certificate in counselling skills. And Ken and myself, we've taught lots of people counselling skills through the years. And I had someone who came to me, did a level 3 certificate in counselling skills, or the certificate, and they were a radiographer, and their goal was purely and simply to be able to deliver difficult news, in a more thoughtful way, in a more kindly way. And I've had, police officers, I've had people working drug and alcohol services. I had somebody who was a business person. They just wanted better communication, wanted better communication. And you don't need the three other conditions if you're just using counselling skills. The thing is with the other conditions, which are psychological contact, the first person, the client's in a state of incongruence, and at some level, the client perceives the congruence and the unconditional positive regard of the therapist, are really assessment. They're a kind of soft assessment tool, because as a therapist, you need to have that in your mind, because if someone came and clearly they weren't in equal and present time, maybe they were under the influence of substances, you couldn't have psychological contact. If someone came to you and said, I'm coming for therapy, but I don't think there's too much wrong with me, to be honest. It's very difficult to know where to start. And also, I think the key thing is, and we know this, the research is really, really crystal clear on this. Successful outcomes in therapy, one of the main ingredients or the common factors is the quality of the therapeutic relationship. And, through the years as a therapist, I've spent more time with my supervisor saying, I'm not sure that the relationship is sustaining. What do I need to do? Because once that relationship collapses, you don't have any therapy, because both people become defensive, or the client can become defensive, and that isn't useful. So that is why they're taught at practice level. They're taught as a way of a soft assessment and to inform, I think, to some extent, supervision.
Yeah, very much so. And that differs, doesn't it, from those facilitative conditions that we're discussing, which are how you as the counsellor or as the helper might show up, the listener, how you interact. And it's interesting, we're speaking about empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence, and I think it's worth just, if you're a new listener, just outlining what they are. So empathy is kind of really understanding where that person is when they're bringing their material, when they're telling you how it is from them. What we're not looking to do, and I'm just talking now in a general conversation rather than counselling, what we're not looking to do is defend why we did or didn't do it, or how it could have been or would have been. All we're looking to do with empathy is fully understand it, almost through their eyes. We're trying to see it from their point of view, and then we reflect that back in our body language, in maybe the words that we speak, so that they understand that we kind of really get them. And that is empathy, when I'm here listening to you and I'm trying to walk in your shoes. Unconditional positive regard is to view the person who is speaking with you as a wonderful person, as to for who they are. You see the humanity within them, not what they're talking about or what they may have done or what they may have been through. You're looking at the humanity, the true person that is inside there, and we look at that without judging them. That is that unconditional positive regard. And then the congruence part is very much how we show up as the therapist, where we are honest, where we are truthful, almost transparent in how we rock up. And you were saying, Rory, the evidence very clearly points to the relationship being very, very important. And I have to say that these core conditions, and I'm using the word, there it is, I can hear the alarms going off, the facilitative conditions really do aid in creating that relationship, forming that trust within the relationship with the client, feeling there's somebody here that is different to how my normal interactions go. This is a different kind of place where I can be more myself. And the aim is that the client then seeing the congruence within the counsellor, not being judged, feeling that they're really being listened to and understood, would be able to maybe go a little bit deeper into what it is that they have to bring, because they would perceive it as a threat-free environment. I'm not going to be told off. I'm not going to be corrected. I'm not going to be told what I should have and could have done. I'm just going to be listened to with human kindness, Rory.
Absolutely. The humanity of it. And I think it's interesting within this magazine article, Charles Truax and Robert Karkoff, and you've mentioned this, the Truax and Karkoff empathy scales, refer to the conditions as central therapeutic ingredients. I like that. Therapeutic ingredients. And Levent and Schleen, I mentioned John Schleen on the podcast quite often, refer to them as facilitative conditions. So that's how that came into the language. Interestingly enough, although Rogers never used the term core conditions, you have a look at his writing and he spends more time focusing on empathy, congruence, unconditional positive regard than he does on the other three conditions, sometimes referred to as the therapist conditions. So although Rogers never used that term, I think it's fair to say he put a lot of stock into those three conditions as the main tenet for therapeutic movement. That these are the ones that should be, I guess, put a stronger focus on in training, because that is what forms the relationship. But it is interesting, isn't it? And I hope this little kind of conversation has kind of debunked the myth a bit, Ken.
Yeah. So if you find yourself tempted to write within an assignment that Carl Rogers founded the core conditions, maybe think about expanding that slightly. Yes, of course he did. He found the 6 conditions that are necessary and sufficient to bring about psychological change. But the actual term core conditions sits outside of Carl Rogers. And I think, Rory, what we need is one of your super duper handouts here, just to have a piece of paper that says this, that I can print out on my printer or look at when I'm writing an assignment, that kind of just gives me that very brief overview. And the notes that you provided for me, Rory, this morning, I'm very grateful for those. I think that would make a great beginning to that little handout.
Yes, well, there is a super duper handout that will be on this podcast. And if you want to get that super duper handout, go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, go to episode 272, and that handout is there for you, including a reference to that long gone article in Counselling magazine that was published, I think, in February 2000. So that's almost 23 years ago, isn't it? So it's long gone. There may be copies knocking around somewhere in someone's library, but I think it's a really important article, because it does put into context the importance of all the conditions, but also the focus on what really makes the change in client's life in terms of the theory. And I'm grateful for that. It's a wonderful analysis of Roger's work.
Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counsellingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your Counselling Tutor discount. That's counsellingskillsacademy.com. And as we leave student services and move on to ethical, sustainable practice, we speak today about the topic of should I become accredited. Now, have we heard anybody discussing this topic before, Rory? Is this the first time it's ever seen the light of day?
I think it's.
He giggles.
I think in our Facebook group, they speak of little else, Ken, at the moment. And if you want to go to our Facebook group, you'll have heard this time and time again. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, click it. You'll find us. We're closed group. Knock on the door, and in you come. And you'll see that this is being discussed a lot. Should I become accredited? And I think it's a question that most therapists ask themselves at some point after graduating or progressing in their career, Ken.
Yeah, and I think just as we kind of go into this, the disclaimer here is that Rory and I are not experts on whether you should be accredited or not. We're not giving advice. We're not giving guidance. This is for you to decide your journey. I know that this is a hot topic, and this we've seen in the Facebook group. I was giggling when I was saying, has it seen the light of day? It is happening. It plays out a lot in our Facebook group, and it can get pretty heated at times. With the varying opinions on this. So at the end of the day, it is a decision you can make for yourself. And I would suggest that your starting point with accreditation, if you're looking and deciding, well, do I want to be accredited, is to understand what that is and how that works with your ethical body. And the best place to start that is on your ethical body website. They will have the information for accreditation, usually within the members area. Put in the search for accreditation, and I'm sure you will find a document that will indicate what the pathway to accreditation is. And of course, that pathway has recently changed with the introduction of ScopeEd and with the I know that the awarding bodies kind of paused the accreditation process as they were kind of working through ScopeEd, but that seems to have freed itself now. So even if you have looked before, it may be worth a revisit to see what that accreditation process looks like.
Yes, absolutely. So just so we're clear, that in the UK at the time of recording this podcast, there is no statutory legislation regarding counsellors. Not like in America where you have to be state licensed. Here we have a voluntary register. So I am a member of the National Counselling and Psychotherapeutic Society, and I am on the register, which is sometimes confusingly called the Accredited Register. For the Professional Standards Authority. So if a complaint is levied against me and I'm struck off, it would be impossible for me then to join another ethical body under the PSA, which has happened. Someone's been struck off one body and then they've gone to join another professional body and they've been taken. No, that can't happen now because there's an overarching umbrella, the Professional Standards Association, who hold a register. So once you're off that register, you can't join any other. So I'm a member of the National Counselling and Psychotherapeutic Society, and if I chose to, I could then go through the process of accreditation, which means that I would get I would do an exam. It's not an exam in a hall in exam conditions, but I would have to submit a portfolio of evidence, responding to questions that they would ask, and they would look at that and see if I could become accredited. And the whole point of that is that it would mean me being accountable for my practice. If I decided to go that way, I would be accounting for my practice to my professional body. Now, there are reasons why people become accredited. One is that some work environments ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you work for the National Health Service or some employment assistance providers, they may ask for it. Independent organisations may ask for it. And also, as an individual, you might think, I would like to have my practice overviewed by a critical friend and go for accreditation, and therefore that would give me, I guess, an indication that someone else has overlooked my work and said it is of a standard that can become accredited. So those are the reasons that people become accredited. And of course, there's a cost to that. Different organisations charge different fees, and some professional bodies will charge you more to be a member when you are accredited. So it really is a personal, I think, a personal choice, unless you're asked to by your employer. Now, here's the thing. In all the time I've been practicing, no client has ever asked me if I'm accredited.
Yeah.
Ever.
And you spoke about the one side of the coin, which is why somebody may choose the accreditation route. And that makes sense. And this is about you and your practice and your counselling career. Where do you want to work? Where are you working? What do you want to do out in the counselling world? And the other side of the coin, I guess, and you've kind of touched on some of those points already, and these are not our opinions, these are opinions that we see within the discussions, are the increased fees that by being accredited, I now pay more than a practitioner who is maybe not accredited, and some are asking why and what are the benefits. And of course, one of the benefits is that within the register that would kind of advertise you with if you choose to join it with your ethical body, and if they have one, they may list you as accredited, and that may look more attractive to clients that are going through seeing accredited and not accredited. But the other part of that is, if you are in private practice and clients are finding you from referrals or they're finding you via your website, it is unlikely that a client would be educated in what accreditation is or be looking for accreditation. They may be looking that a practitioner is a member of an ethical body. They may have been told that, but it's unlikely, not impossible, but it is unlikely that they would be educated on the accreditation process and what that looks like. Thus, Rory, I come to the point, full circle, here it comes, of what you just said. I too, in my private practice, have never been asked by a client if I am accredited, but I have been asked if I was a member of an ethical body.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another aspect to this is that prior to 2014, before we had what's called a certificate of proficiency test. Certainly the BACP have. It was pretty loose. You graduated, and then you could just kind of carry on. There was no overarching body like the Professional Standards Authority that oversaw. There's no professional organisation, an umbrella organisation that held a professional register. And in 2014, the Professional Standards Authority took that role, and any professional body you join, BACP, NCS, British Psychoanalytical Association, Association of Christian Counsellors, there are others, now send their membership to the PSA, and they hold the register. So if you're struck off the register, you cannot hop to different professional bodies. And the key thing is, before 2014, you didn't have to insurance, and CPD was just kind of, it would be nice if you did it. But those people before 2014 who were accredited had to have insurance, had to have CPD, and they could be audited at any time. And what happened was, at 2014, when this new age of the Professional Standards Authority came to light and started to hold the register, the voluntary register as it's called, everybody, be they accredited or not, had to have insurance, had to evidence a CPD, and could be audited at any time. So you didn't have to be accredited to be audited. And that kind of leveled the field a bit. And I think for people who are thinking of getting accredited, they might have thought, well, actually, that was a big part of accreditation. the fact that at some point you could be audited for your supervision. Are you attending supervision? Are you got CPD? Have you insurance? That type of thing. So it's a very personal view. And as Ken said, we're not experts in this. We're just two therapists who have a chat about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. So, if you're in the Facebook group, I wonder what your thoughts are on it. Are you someone who's been practicing who's not accredited and is happy with that? Or are you someone who's passionate about it and says that you should be accredited? I think it's an individual decision, but it might be influenced by your employment. If you want to work in the NHS or work within paid employment, it's more increasingly likely, if you want to work for an employer, that they will ask for accreditation. I think that's the mood music I'm hearing, Ken.
And you're referencing back to 2014 and a very different world in counselling at that time. And we look at how it is today, and we have the accreditation process, which is voluntary. You decide whether it is suitable for your good self. But as we go forward, it seems like we're edging ever nearer to counselling being regulated in the United Kingdom. You mentioned, Rory, kind of going in. It is not regulated at the moment. It's not a protected profession, counselling and is psychotherapy protected? I don't know if it is.
It's a title, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think you can't call yourself a medical doctor.
Yes.
And there are, counselling isn't a protected title. There are some psychotherapeutic titles that are.
Yes.
So things like art therapist, they are protected titles, yeah. And there's some other psychotherapeutic titles that are protected, but in the main, anybody can call themselves a psychotherapist or a counsellor.
Yeah, and that is as it stands today. And you were mentioning that mood music, Rory. I know that there is shuffles going on at government ministerial level with members of ethical bodies speaking there, and it's interesting. I remember when I started studying. And we're talking many years ago, there was rustles in the wind that counselling may move towards towards being recognised and protected. And all these years later, it still isn't. So if it seems like a very slow process, if indeed that is where it is heading. And I recognise in the United States, it is of course protected, and the level of education required to kind of go through the gate to become a counsellor in the States is very different to the United Kingdom, as it is in many countries of the world.
In Ireland, it is. In Ireland,
Yes.
It's in the Republic of Ireland, it's a regulated profession, isn't it now?
Yeah. So what's going to happen in the future? Well, we don't know, but we'll certainly be here to tell you about it when it does happen on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and that is ethical, sustainable practice for today. And we now move on to Practice Matters. That's the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We generally will have a lecturer that has maybe done a lecture for our counsellor CPD library, and then Rory will meet up with that person to have a discussion to kind of give you a taste of what that is all about. And I know that you met with Daniel Hand about role-playing games in psychotherapy, Rory.
I did, and we've spoken to Daniel before on the podcast. And he's taken a innovative approach. I think the term ploughing new ground is a very apt term for the work that Daniel's doing. And he has just published a book on role-playing games in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, especially poignant towards children. He's developed a whole new approach using role-playing games. And it was a pleasure to talk to him, and this is what he had to say about it.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
And it's always a joy to have a repeat guest on the podcast. We first met our guest in episode 213, where he discussed role-playing games and therapy. So it's with great delight and not a small amount of joy, I welcome back Daniel Hand to speak to us about role-playing games in therapy, and I believe a new book soon to be released. Welcome, Daniel.
Mr. Lees Oaks, pleasure to see you, sir. How are you keeping?
I'm doing very well, and I hope you are too. So when we last met, you were breaking new ground on role-playing games in therapy. Just remind us, for those people who have not seen that, listen to that episode, and you should really go and listen to that episode 213. Have an overview. Let's have an overview of what game playing in therapy is and how it's helpful.
Remind you? Come on, that's optimistic, Rory. That implies that I remember. So role-playing games have been part of the modern lexicon now for just under half a century. The one that most people know of is Dungeons and Dragons. It's basically can be thought of a group of people get together with a bunch of dice. They create characters, often in fantastical realms, but they can be science fiction, they can be horror, they can be modern warfare, any number of genres. And then together they tell a story. Simple as that, really. And I approach just about everything from a writer's point of view. I was a fiction writer long before I was a therapist or, well, anything, frankly. And even during my basic training, it was a case, well, stories are obviously useful as part of the therapeutic process, and RPGs are just storytelling, but you've got dice involved. How can we incorporate the two? And the light bulb moment came when I tried it with a client who was a young boy who was suffering from mutism, selective mutism. Created a character with him. Really torturous process. The poor lad was trying so hard, just couldn't say anything, and heart really went out to him. Created this character, which was a dragon-born sorcerer, so half man, half dragon, and can cast spells. I mean, what's not to love? Introduced him to the story, and within moments, this 11-year-old boy who hadn't said a full sentence in months was just talking. That's incredible. It was unbelievable, and the whole reason for working, and this is what I've discovered since in the years since, is it's all about that kind of arm's length approach, but keeping the client ever so slightly distanced from their issues, and we'll talk about this in a few moments, I'm sure. But when you create your character in an RPG for play, in an RPG for therapy, whatever the circumstances, all of a sudden it's the character that has the problems. It's the character who's taking all of the chances. It's the character who is, if the character does anything wrong, it's the character that's going to have to pay for it.
Yes.
And so this young man, he didn't have to worry about talking because nothing bad was going to happen to him because he wasn't the one doing the talking. It was the character who was doing the talking. And obviously he learned that you can talk without having to worry about frightening repercussions. And through that practice, we were able to work on him coming out of his shell. An amazing moment, Rory. I mean, we all have one or two moments in our professional lives that just we'll never forget, and that very, very much is one of them. Certainly.
There's not often this happens, but literally the hairs on the back of my neck are starting to stand up. It's such a monumental event, isn't it, where you bring two different ideas together, counselling and game playing, and all of a sudden this selectively mute client can now tell their story through effectively a third party, and for want of a better word, I guess, an avatar or a player.
Good word.
And they could do that at arm's length. And as a former child therapist, I can say that that's not particularly a new idea in terms of the third party.
Not at all, no.
But the implementing into a gameplay certainly is. And I think it's an object lesson in working with certainly young clients, and indeed maybe older clients, in that it's easy to live through a separate entity than it is to talk about themselves.
We all know it's easier to give advice to other people than it is to discuss whether or not we should or shouldn't behave a certain way.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I often describe RPG therapy as play therapy and therapeutic role play just taken to their natural conclusions.
Yes.
And no, you're absolutely right. I mean, in terms of the age range, I mean, I work with adults. I've got a 50-something-year-old client. I'm not sure they'd appreciate me sharing their complete age, but you know, all the way through the spectrums of identities, cultures, ages. Just because at the end of the day, it's just having fun.
It is, and
fun is. Yeah.
And also it's an underpinning of safety, isn't it? You know, when you're living through, you know, a character on a role-playing board, you're relatively safe because that character is not wholly you, although, you know, you are speaking maybe your truths through the character. It's not actually you. I think that idea is a very strong one.
Well, and this is, I mean, I've started calling it the fictional frame in action. So obviously you've got the therapeutic frame that we all know and love. You've got your boundaries, your time, your environment. The fictional frame is taking the therapeutic process and storifying it, essentially, you know, just so adding an entire new world to, you know, this small room that traditionally has a couple of chairs, a box of tissues, a clock.
Yes.
And all of a sudden it becomes a galaxy with starships and robots, or a fantasy world with dragons and volcanoes, or any number of things. And you know, just by the power of telling stories, using your imagination, being, you know, just letting yourself go, you can do, I'm going to use the word literally anything. There will be listeners who are going to tell me, oh, you shouldn't use that word, but I'm going to use it here because the only limits are your and the client's imagination.
Yes.
And it you know, you can tackle bullies by fighting monsters.
Yes.
You can make friends with those monsters. You know, you can just let off a bit of steam by wading through an army of goblins and just, you know, I've just had a really bad week, I just want to hit something.
Yes.
Yeah, great, go for it. And the lovely thing that I found whilst writing this book, thank you so much for plugging it for me, is how universal it can be for therapists to implement. Because I'm integratively trained, so I come at things primarily from a person-centered and psychodynamic point of view. But if you look at it from the right direction, any modality will find something to use here. And that was actually one of the most exciting parts of the writing journey for me, was realizing how universal it could be. It's amazing.
Yes, and you've mentioned that you've actually published a book. It's called Roleplaying Games in Psychotherapy, A Practitioner's Guide. Now, we're recording this in the May of 2023. So for those people who are listening in the future, the book, because podcasts tend to be listened in any aspect of time, the book will be released in June of 2023. And what we will do is we will put the link to the book in our show notes page. To find our show notes, if you just go to counsellingtutor.com and search for Daniel, you'll find his episode 213, and also the episode that this is being put in. So you've released a book, and I think it's really important because in all therapeutic endeavours, there's usually a book that goes with it, some kind of methodology or some kind of meta model of using an idea in practice. Would you say that this is your meta model?
Rather alarmingly, yes, I think I would. So the difficulty with adapting quote unquote traditional role-play games, like, again, the one everybody knows is Dungeons and Dragons, to therapy is that RPGs tend to be rather complex and not therapeutic environment friendly. It can take hours to create characters for some of these games. Most of them are aimed at groups of 4 or 5 people. And therapists, by and large, yes, some of us are trained for group therapy, but the majority of our compatriots are only trained for one-to-one work. And how many of us have time to go through a 600-page book just to learn how to roll a couple of dice? So the book itself, the Practitioner's Guide, came along really just as an attempt to simplify the act of learning this. If you want to call it a modality, you can call it a modality, but just to learn how to implement RPGs without having to spend the 10 years learning RPGs outside of therapy.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a shorthand book to it. You can if you want to go down that route, you can learn pretty quickly, I guess.
That's the aim, hopefully. Yeah. But also, all of the systems and the rules that are in the book are what I've been using in my practice now for mumble years. I'm not old, I promise. And I've seen the results. I've had selective mute young men talk to me. I've had people in their mid-60s who come saying they've never known how to play. I've worked with people suffering from addiction and alcoholism. I'm going to really tempt fate here, but so far I haven't had a problem. I haven't had a failure so far. Yeah. There will be a time, I'm going to say that now, obviously, because there's no such thing as an intervention that works for everybody. But it's been an incredible journey, and I really want as many people on the train as possible.
Yes. And I think probably one thing that we've not discussed, which might be worth just having a little bit of a wander into, is that you discussed a client who was non-verbal or selective verbal, and as we know, selective verbal can be through trauma, but it also can be a indication of autism. I speak as a grandfather of a child who is non-verbal, and I wonder, for those of us who work with clients who are autistic and maybe have special interests in role-playing games, this sounds like an ideal way in.
Doesn't it just? Again, lots of experience working with autistic clients, and the beauty of it as an intervention is you get to practice being any number of different people. And a difficulty that people who struggle with autism face is frequently not really having a great idea as to who they are. And by letting them play as, a space bounty hunter, or a lieutenant in the British Army in the middle of the Third World War, or, I've got no idea why that one came to me. they can just have a go at practicing what it's like just to do any number of things and realize that they're not going to be punished for their feelings and for their experiences.
They can be themselves, or any number of themselves, to try them out.
100%. And you made the comment earlier how elements of the character frequently represent elements of the player. Well, again, coming at this from an author's point of view, a fiction author's point of view, it doesn't matter how hard you try to make your characters other than yourself, the author always ends up in the character, because how could it not? The only frame of reference I have for life is the one that I've had, so automatically I'm going to project some of that onto this fictional person. And even the character creation process itself is phenomenal to work through. I mean, the sheet I present in the book looks at hopes and fears and relationships, and you can have the most wonderful conversations going, oh, okay, so your character here, they have a difficult relationship with their parents. Yeah, how's your relationship with your parents? Oh, funny that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It seems to me, and I thought this the first time I interviewed you, this is groundbreaking work. This is incredibly groundbreaking work, and a piece of work that we need to pay attention to, certainly for those of us who work with young people. Role-Playing Games in Psychotherapy, a Practitioner's Guide, is published by Palgrave Macmillan. It'll be on sale from June of 2023, I suspect, in all the usual places one would find books. And all I have to say is it was a pleasure interviewing in the first podcast, and it's a real pleasure interviewing now. Daniel Hand, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to our guest, Daniel. Thank you to you, Rory. As always, you reach out, you put your time aside to bring us the CPD that we need in Practice Matters. This has been episode 272 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with student services with myths, debunks, and the core conditions, the true history of the core conditions discussed. So, and then we moved on to ethical, sustainable practice. Ken and myself talked about the should I become accredited? Should you become accredited? And then finally, that lovely interview with Daniel Hand, where he talks about role-playing games in psychotherapy. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.